Recording. Cool. Cool. So Seth, why don't you just tell people who you are, what you do exactly, and then we'll kind of take it from there.
Sure. Yeah, thanks for having me, Adam. I'm Seth Campbell. I am a assistant professor at the University of Maine, and I also direct a program in Alaska called the Juneau Icefield Research Program. And I specialize in glaciology and kind of snow science research in Alaska, Canada, Antarctica, any place cold, and spend about 4 to 5 months a year in the field in various cold locations studying snow and ice.
How did you get into this? Like, how was this a thing that you decided to do? It's that you're the only one that I know. Obviously, you said you and your wife are both glaciologists, but like, so that makes one and a half that I know now. But like, how did you get into this? How did it start, and where did the interest start?
Besides growing up in Maine and freezing cold weather all the time.
Yes, besides that.
That's honestly that's probably the start. Just being out in the woods in Maine a lot during the winter with my dad, and um, just realized I started climbing at a pretty young age in high school, and fell in love with rock climbing, and fell in love with ice climbing, and had my first kind of glacier mountain climb was Mount Rainier in the mid, I guess it would be the mid '90s, and just ran with it after that, basically.
So obviously one of the reasons I wanted to have you on was to kind of talk about what, I don't know, the current climate situation is too. One of the reasons that I wanted to have you on is just to chat. The other reason that I wanted to have you on is a diagram that you made out of flubber that we'll talk about in a little bit here. And then the other reason I wanted to have you on is because like I talked to Ian McIntosh a few weeks ago, and he was kind of talking about how the work that he does with POW is so important to him because like we might not have ski seasons sooner than later. Like it's actually really, really important
Yep.
that people start paying attention, and not just paying attention now, like actually start doing some shit. So talk to me a little bit about what you've noticed change in your field, and what indications you've kind of seen that like, okay, like some real changes need to start happening.
Yeah, I think probably the biggest thing that I've noticed, honestly, is the broader community around me is asking me more questions. I think it seems like this topic's getting a bit more mainstream, and growing up in Maine, Maine's it's a mixed liberal and conservative mixed kind of community. You have a lot of the community relies on the fishing industry, lumber, farming. It's kind of a lot of tourism, but everything we have in Maine is based on the environment, right? Most of our industry is based on a healthy environment, and a lot of the industries that we have in Maine are at risk in some capacity as a function of climate change. And so when you think about the skiing industry, that's a great example that we may have probably 3 mountains in the Northeast that will likely survive if we kind of continue on the path as we are in terms of prime ski locations in future years, just based on the snow line, the melt line of where you transition from rainwater to snow continues to rise in elevation. And the
And those
next,
would be what?
Sugarloaf being one of them, probably, and then probably a few in probably Vermont, or New Hampshire, and kind of the higher elevation regions, like
Yeah.
Wildcat, for example.
Okay.
Those are probably the ones that will survive. Um, I think the other crux you run into is the season's getting shorter, right? You're clipping off
Yeah,
the
super
beginning and the end of the
competitive.
season, right? And we're seeing that most ski resorts around the world are seeing around the country are seeing this, certainly. Um, and a lot of places are not having as much snow as they used to have. I mean, look at Colorado. We're still waiting for snow to fall in Colorado. Has it fallen yet? I don't know. I haven't checked today,
I
but
don't think so. I mean,
yeah,
I was just telling you, like, I'm going next week, and it's going to be terrible. It's
yeah.
just like I might as well stay in New England.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean that's a concern that a lot of us have, and I got into this career from my outdoor interest initially, and kind of merged the science with my outdoor activities, my outdoor recreation activities, and I think that's what's cool about POW too. It really is kind of a
Yeah.
neat organization that merges your science community with your people that really live and play in the outdoors, and have a good voice to kind of speak up and spread that word. So from a science perspective, it's changing enough from when I was a child, 35 years ago, to now, that we're starting to see these changes occur in our lifetime. And I think there's some cool books that have come out recently that are kind of talking about this. I think you posted one book a few a month or so ago, maybe, and another book that was written by Porter Fox, called titled "The Last Winter." He just came out with this a couple of weeks ago. It does a really nice job kind of characterizing things that they're seeing out west, and they joined us on the June. He joined us on the June ice field in Alaska, and they went to the Alps. And the book talks about changes they're seeing in the Alps, and it's an interesting view because it kind of takes it from the perspective of a combination of the scientists as well as the locals that are kind of making their living in the ski industry as well. The communities that thrive on snow as well, not just not just the ski slopes, but the communities that are centered around that. So it's kind of probably worth a read, and it was interesting working with him on that process because I learned a lot from a different perspective.
Yeah, I'm super excited to read it. I have it on order now, and I'm like, it's something I'm very interested in. And I actually reached out to him to see if he wants to come on and chat too. Like,
Cool.
I just think that these things are, we need to start talking about them more actively, and some stuff needs to actually be done. And I think part of the reason that POW is so important is that, like you said, it merges everybody's like favorite athletes
Mhm.
with the need to actually make changes and take climate initiatives seriously and take action, whether it's in Congress or just by donating for more research and donating for more programs available for these types of things. Like the severity of the issue has kind of just increased over the past, since the last time that we've spoken. I feel like everybody's foot is on the gas a little more. And the reality of the situation is we might not even have a ski industry really to talk about in a decade, 2 decades, who knows, right? Like, I mean, it's
Yeah.
totally a possibility. And if you look at the seasons and the way that they've gone over the past few years, they're so short. Like, I mean, realistically. And the other problem is people's want to go skiing and like go and buy gear is higher than it's ever been before.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to go outside. So these areas are getting used at a higher rate, are requiring more employees, but at the same time, you have less terrain open, less skiable acres basically on a day-to-day
Yeah.
basis that people can go use. And I think that part of it is only going to get worse. It's concerning, man.
Well, it's a bit, you brought up a cool, I say cool point. In some ways, it's this COVID epidemic has kind of forced people to get outside a little bit more.
Mm.
Like we saw this influx of people moving to Maine or visiting Maine, and our outside locations have been busier than ever, which I'm psyched about seeing people getting outside. But then that you bring up that overuse and the use question in some of these naturally beautiful lands and protected lands. But then you bring up other issues like, are there issues, there are danger issues as well in some of these locations that you kind of have a mass group of people going to different locations, and the environment that they're traveling to. Let's take Mount Hood for example. I'm kind of curious myself. I don't know this. Maybe you do, about what's the use been like for Mount Hood, for the Timberline Lodge region, and I know that area has been changing over the years in terms of access.
I
But
don't know. I mean, I know the seasons are shorter now. Like, I mean,
yeah,
the hood seasons, the available ski time there is significantly shorter than it used to be, and it just visibly looks different when you go there. Like, I was there this like August or whatever, and usually you go there in August or early September. It's like still very skiable. You can
mhm,
find stuff, and it looks filled in, right? And this year was not the case at all.
not the case. Yeah, yeah. I
It's
saw
just
I saw pictures. It was pretty bare.
it's bare. It's
Yeah.
like that. Yeah, that kind of thing, seeing a year to year change, I think is part of the reason you're starting to see a lot of people like me like start to freak out about it more. Whereas I felt very compelled to talk about it before. I felt like it was a really important topic to talk
Mhm.
about, but at this point, I kind of feel like it is the most important topic to really harp on these days.
Well, and part of me also wonders if I mean, I can't remember the last time we talked. It was probably about a year ago, maybe.
Yeah,
Was my
probably about that.
little longer. I'm not sure if we had the change in the guard in the political spectrum or not, but it's certainly been a bit more forefront in media with some of the recent climate conferences, the recent release of the IPCC the IPCC report that just came out that really hones in on our impact on climate. So I think that type of material and folks that are our generation, the next upcoming generation, and are really taking a stand on these issues more so than ever, I think. So I think you're right. I think it is getting more mainstream right now, and there's a lot of things we can certainly do. I think the the grassroots action, again, back to POW. I think the reason it is so important is that it actually is a organization that's working to kind of put voices together, and that's how change happens. Instead of like the individual, you need to kind of merge forces in some capacity to make a difference, because the changes that really need to happen are big business, and
Mm.
not individual decisions that we make, but it's the major polluters. We can certainly make a lot of decisions ourselves, but we have such a small contribution relative to the overall big business entities, and that's kind of more of a legal and global scale process that needs to occur. Yeah, so it's definitely out there, and it's an important topic to consider. I think it is our topic that we are considering in our lifetime, easily.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess that brings up a good point too, is it worth even investing for a lot of these businesses and a lot of these companies in the ski industry for a future in it, right? Like, I think the first thing that I thought of initially was like, okay, there's places like Big Snow in New Jersey that are inside, right? I think you're going to start to see more places like that happen because of these shortened seasons, right? Like, to me, that's a win-win. Obviously, going outside is a totally different experience, and it is not the same as being in a fucking shopping mall in New Jersey, but it
Yeah.
is very much going to be a semi-norm, I would think, going forward, because these resorts kind of need to invest in things like this, because we are already in this, and this kind of is a different point, but we're already in this system where we all like use a shit ton of gas and
Mhm,
a shit ton, like we are not using a ton of reusable resources
mhm,
or energy sources as an industry as a whole right now. I mean, some
mhm.
places are really good about it. I mean, you're starting to see the more use of windmills and solar and this thing and
Yep.
that thing, but I don't know that that stuff is enough. Like, this industry is kind of built off of, like, built on the backs of things that are causing a lot of the issues.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, that's a whole nother issue that we could talk about for days, obviously. But
Yeah.
I will say, that you mentioned about, is it worth these ski resorts to continue as is? And I think I have had some conversations with some folks from various ski resorts, and I know diversification has become key, right? It's not just about skiing. It's about, well, what else can they do during the summer? Can they mountain bike? Can they have other
Mhm.
activities at their resorts that are bringing people in? So it's not just the winter season that's getting shorter and shorter and shorter. And I suspect, quite certain, those resorts that are able to do that and repurpose their facilities and their resources, are going to be the ones that thrive and survive in the future. It's all
Mhm.
about being able to handle that change. What that means for the ski industry, I really don't know. Yeah, but I think there are things that can be done. So, for example, I know a ton of students that ski from Maine that go to Sugarloaf every year. They get their seasons pass at Sugarloaf, or other schools. They'll go to Sunday River, or other local mountains. But the cost sharing, and changing up our transportation strategies. Those are the types of things that can be done, and making this list services based on renewable energy when possible. Those are the types of things that can certainly be considered. But it's all an analysis, right? And it's all a financial analysis. It's bigger than one conversation we can have here. But at least those types of things are being put on the table, right? And I
Yeah.
think the way those are put on the table are, as a business person, they want to reduce costs as much as possible, right? Well,
Mm.
you can totally wipe out your fee you're paying for electricity by having renewable energy on site. Fantastic. you know
Yeah.
So those are things that are finally coming to the table, which I think is an important piece of the pie moving forward.
Yeah, that's part of the reason that I think people are starting to do it finally is
Mhm.
that it actually makes dollars and cents. Like it
Yep.
makes way more sense to have reusable resources at this point than it used to. Like it used to be clunky and harder to use, and now the technology has gotten better, and we've gotten to the point where I feel like there's no reason that I don't know, half the houses in my, maybe not half, but a quarter of the houses in my town have solar at this point, right? And I think it's because my electric bill is like $9 a month or some shit like that. Like in my old house, it's like $90 a month. So like
Yeah.
it makes a difference
Yep.
in the day-to-day person's life. So it definitely makes a difference for these bigger companies, especially the ski resorts that are looking for every single way to pinch pennies. And when you think about it, especially in New England, think about the cost of snowmaking.
Mhm.
Like especially on a year like this year. Like I told you, I skied Stratton today. It was
Yep.
terrible. It's grass in the parking lot or glare ice in the parking lot, depending on where you go.
Yep.
And then you get on the resort and it's actually skiing pretty okay.
Yep.
So
Yep.
that's a shit ton of snowmaking that
Yep.
has to take place, which is
Yep.
not like, it's not free. That is one of the biggest
Right.
expenses for
Yeah.
these New England resorts is keeping the trails open early season.
Mhm. Yep. Yep. For sure. For sure. No, it's not an easy question. Yeah, I I can tell you I do science advocacy, but the science policy side of things and the business side of things and how you actually make these changes are really hard questions to answer.
Yeah.
Um, but it takes an effort by all the community members to be at the table. I think is an important thing, and it's not beneficial to have people yelling back and forth at each other either, because
Right.
there's a lot of people. It's their livelihood. This is how they care for their family, and it's a lot of these are not easy questions, but at least having people at the table is important for these discussions. So yeah, so in general, I think the ski industry in Maine and kind of the New England ski industry recognizes these challenges, from what I've gleaned from conversations I've had with a range of folks. So it's nice to see that it's recognized in this part of the U.S.
Yeah, it definitely seems like people are starting to get it a little more,
Mhm.
and I think that's what is nice to see. I just don't know if it's enough, right? Like
Mhm.
it's and maybe it's not. And we can talk about that part all day long. And at the end of the day, it kind of is what it is.
Mhm.
And at this point, stuff needs to start happening.
Mhm.
Um, One of the things I wanted to bring up, and let's see if I can use this share
Oh yeah.
thing here. I want to pull up this bit here. All right, I'm not going to do this. This is too annoying. Okay. What I am going to talk about is this little video that you made, which has a bajillion views on Twitter at this point.
Yeah.
Explain this to me. It's for people just listening to the audio. I'll post a link
Yeah. Sure.
to the tweet. But what is this thing? So the tweet is, I started using Flubber in 2007 for glacier models in STE Meducation. What does this mean? What is it simulating? Kind of explain this a little bit for me.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I'm a glaciologist. So, what a glaciologist does is we're interested in seeing how glaciers get bigger and smaller over, you know, long periods of time and over shorter periods of time, and that change in glacier size has impacts on things like sea level rise, right? Well, one of the ways to explain how glaciers flow just like water flows or rocks flow technically just over millions of years. Glaciers flow as well, and flubber is something you can make with Elmer's glue, a little borax, and some hot water. So I do this demonstration pretty frequently with grade school kids all the way up through college, and there's actually published papers using flubber to actually publish looking at how flubber deforms, because it happens to deform quite similarly to how ice flows. And if you think about a glacier is generated from snowfall at high elevations, and eventually that snow pile it piles up on top of itself to a point where gravity starts pushing it downhill. And that movement of mass downhill is basically what this flubber model simulates. So what this model doesn't show is the model's actually on a slight slope. So the flubber is just kind of sliding downhill, and the way it's set up, it has kind of valley walls that are just basically just pieces of wood, and then I put this little mountain in the middle, and the flubber just kind of flows around the mountain as it's moving down the slope, and it does a really good job simulating how ice flows in a valley. So if you were to go to Mount Rainier as a skier, if you go to Mount Rainier and look at Nisqually Glacier or to Timberline Lodge, or if you go to Denali National Park, Denali has the Kiltna Glacier, the Ruth Glacier. Basically, you see the types of structures that form at these glaciers that you would see in this flubber model, and so it's kind of a teaching tool to kind of show how glaciers start at high elevation and they flow down glacier to lower elevation. The mass is gained at high elevation as it flows to down glacier lower elevations. Mass is wasted by melting processes, or in Antarctica or Greenland, you might have large calving events where big chunks of ice fall off the end of the glacier into the ocean. But this model that I made, I don't know how many views it got, but it seemed to strike a nerve with the science education community really excited about it.
52,000, Seth. 52,000 views on a flubber model of a glacier. Like that's crazy.
It's not exactly
that's why I actually saw it and I was like, oh fuck, we should talk about this because it's really good.
Well, it made me chuckle because I was like, I feel like the caving in Antarctica and some of the other things are cooler than that, but
way cooler, by the way, way cooler.
It's supposed to a flubber model, but yeah, no, it is a good teaching tool, and it's pretty neat because when you think about how we work as a scientist, and when you're teaching students, when you're teaching young kids about glaciers and snow, and you want to get them outside. When kids are playing with stuff in their hands, like flubber, it's like silly putty basically. And the example I can give that helps people understand how flubber deforms, if you have a Snickers bar, for example, if I take a Snickers bar and I pull it really slow, it kind of stretches out, right? If I pull it really fast, it actually breaks and fractures. Well, that's basically what a glacier does as well. A glacier, when it's under high stress, that high stress as I'm pulling it really fast, it fractures and it creates crevasses. Whereas if I pull really, really slow, it just deforms. What happens are all the crystals in the ice itself deform around themselves, so you don't have the crevassing that occurs. So when I say flubber is a good example of how glaciers move, it's kind of an analog to glaciers, and people have published papers using flubber to kind of study ice dynamics in glaciers. So it's a kind of a good introduction for teaching people about glaciers and how ice moves around the Earth. So that's all I posted, and I've been doing this since I think that was actually one of my first flubber models, probably in 2007. So about 14 years I've been doing this, and
crazy that it resonated now.
Exactly.
But it's crazy. I think people are interested now, and I think that's we keep kind of going back to that. But people give a shit these days, a little more than they did a few years ago.
Yeah, well, I think another reason why people get interested in stuff like that is if you put a little bit of information about, okay, how do you do this? Anytime you're posting something online, I've learned this. It's better to post something to explain what you did and what you can use it for, as opposed to just posting a picture. In the education science community, if people are actually like, hey, I might do this in the classroom. And that was a lot of the comments. I got a lot of individual emails saying, hey, can you kind of walk me through how you do this in the classroom and how you set it up in a classroom to kind of explain glaciers and how glaciers flow, and are there other examples you use? So there was a very large mass influx of emails after that video, mostly from science, from K through 12, high school, grade school, and then some college folks.
I'd imagine that's who would have the most use for it on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, for sure. It was fun. It was fun to see the interest, for sure. I didn't realize it hit that many.
It's quite a few. I was pretty shook when I saw it myself. I'm just like, Jesus Christ, what is this? And it's Twitter. I feel like nobody's really on Twitter. There are people on Twitter, but it's not like that's the place for this kind of thing usually. So put that thing.
Yeah, I'm not good at posting regularly on these types of things. I just throw a few things up here and there, and I have some friends that also do TikTok, and they one cracks me up. His name's Peter Neff, and I can't remember what his handle is for TikTok, but he's got like, I don't know, like 1 million followers or something like that,
So
because
yeah,
he
so
posts
great.
his videos from Antarctica, and he explains what he's doing in Antarctica. So it's like ice coring and going to these kind of extreme locations, and people suck it up. It's kind of like a little education thing. I'm not that active to be able to. I'm not.
People like somebody that's an expert, dude. They like
Yeah,
really like, especially on TikTok. Like, I can't tell you how many cooking videos that I've watched in the last week that are just like somebody telling me how to make something that I already know how to make. And
yeah.
they're just like showing me a way to, and I'm like, I already know how to do this. And I'm watching this for the 15th time in a row. So TikTok is like the Wild West to me. It's so insane. And yeah, I don't know. We're
Well,
not getting.
maybe I'll do a few TikTok posts and see what happens in the next
You
few.
should. You should. It's funny. It's like I thought it was for children for a while, and it's apparently not. It's for everybody. It's
Yep.
somebody in Ski Patrol today told me they had a TikTok, and I'm like, I'm not, because I saw him like sliding on the ice in the front of the lodge, and I was like, what are you doing? TikTok. Like, oh,
TikTok.
yes,
Well,
yeah,
if I feel like if it gets science out to people, cool. All right.
yeah. I guess
I'll
it
try
is.
it. I'll try it. Maybe
Um,
I can be goofy with my niece or something like that, and put a dance together to glacier modeling or something.
yeah. So one of the other things I kind of wanted to mention too was you talked to Porter after you like after the book came out, you kind of did a series of questions with him. One
Yeah.
of the questions you had for him was, if people can take one thing away from this,
Hmm.
essentially,
Hmm.
what should they take? And his answer was that everything is connected.
Yeah.
So what does that mean when it comes to glaciers and even as broad as climate change, but I guess specifically for what you do?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'll because I'm a Mainer. I grew up in Maine, and so I think it's an easy location for me to kind of give an example. But yeah, I'm people often ask me, why am I in Alaska all the time? Studying glaciers in Alaska. What's that have to
Yeah.
do with Maine? Well, Alaska meltwater, it comes off. You kind of have this ice field to ocean connection where you have meltwater that comes off the ice field. It works its way into the Gulf of Alaska. That freshwater influx into the Gulf of Alaska, it basically impacts the fisheries, the microbiology, all the way to the economy. Right, it's a big fishing industry there. Right. Well, so the same thing is effectively happening in Maine in some capacity. You have a whole bunch of freshwater that's coming off of Greenland, and that fresh water basically cycles its way south, and it mixes with water that's moving northward, and it's impacting the freshwater saltwater processes around the Gulf of Maine. And we know right now how that's happening, and the complexities associated with it are not quite so simple. But we know right now from observations that the coast of Maine waters are warming faster than about 99% of the planet, which
Mm,
is huge, right? And so what's that going to do to the fishing industry on the coast of Maine, right? So when
holy
Porter
shit.
mentioned that everything's connected, the point is like what's happening in the Arctic, what happens in the Arctic and what happens in the tropics impacts us, right? And so if you think about how just atmospherically how heat moves around the Earth, the more heat arrives in the mid latitudes than in the northern latitudes, just based on the process of sun hitting the Earth, and that heat is pushed northward, right? And so the atmosphere is moving around and transporting heat, and the ocean transports heat, and the glaciers transport fresh water, and all those processes kind of interplay with each other. So I think that's what Porter was getting at, is that all these
Mm,
processes in areas where there's very little people still
yeah.
impact, right? And yeah, I think that's starting to become clearer nowadays. I think one of the reasons it's not as clear as it could be in many communities is when science is taught, at least for generations, it was taught where topics were very sectional, right? You would get chemistry, and you would get biology, and you would
Right.
get physics. But nowadays we know all of these parts kind of mix with each other, right? And Earth system science is basically combining all of these different science disciplines together, to understand Earth processes, and it's a hard discipline. Earth sciences is a hard discipline to understand because it requires understanding in all these kind of sub disciplines. But that's how the Earth works. So hopefully in future years, the Earth systems science is going to be bigger in curriculum, because I think I'm pretty convinced that how we dig ourselves out of some of the holes we're in is better education, nationwide, globally, in the situations that we're putting ourselves into. So
Yeah. Can I ask you something not necessarily related to the US, because I think our mindset on climate change is very politicized and it's
yep.
very
Mhm.
related to how you align yourself as a human being as opposed to what actually is happening, right?
Yep.
Um, for example, a place like Norway, I just had Nikolai
Mhm.
Shermer on a couple weeks ago, and
Yep.
one of the I talked to him last year about this, but one of the things we talked about was Norway as a country and the way that they treat climate change and the way that other European countries in general treat climate change, and even the way that Canada treats climate change.
Mhm.
Maybe not as much Canada, but what what is different about the approaches in those places versus the approach in the US? And aside from it just being a political thing, right? What can be done to kind of change the perspective of people, I guess, that they start looking at it in a way that's a little more global?
Mhm.
Because we live in a time, right, that's so sorry that this is such a long-winded question, but we live in a time where everybody's so connected, right? Like we're doing this, we're 4 hours apart from each other, right? You're on social and you're 2 seconds away from connecting with, Miley Cyrus, like it's that kind of world these days. And I guess I just wonder why we haven't taken more from places like
Mhm.
that are starting to get it and starting to use systems and use the knowledge and the research that they have to start making serious changes in the way that they treat these bigger businesses.
Yep. Um, so I will. I'll preface this with I am not a. I don't consider myself a great science communicator. I do it, and this is one of the other reasons I like Protect Our Winters. They advocate for imperfect advocacy. You know, like you're not perfect in everything you do, right? And nobody is really, right?
Right.
But the best you can do is learn a little bit about how to become a better at science communication. And a person that I respect greatly in our science community that I think is a phenomenal role model for this process of improving our ability to connect with each other and get past what are perceived political differences or societal differences is Catherine Hayjo. She's a climate scientist out of Texas, and she also published a really cool book recently. I think it's titled "Saving Us," and it's worth a read because she does a really nice job diving into uh, what generally works well with connecting with people and what doesn't work so well, and why we don't respond well to certain styles of pressure, and why we compartmentalize ourselves, when the pressure's on, and we even get feistier when the pressure's on to try to change our minds. She just does a really good job with that description, and I think she's interesting because she's a very well known, well respected climate scientist. She spends a lot of time talking with religious community members. She's very religious herself, and in a lot of situations, people might pit the religious community against the science community, which in fact is not really true. What she does is she does a good job creating those personal relationships and creating those personal links. And her strategy is making the link of helping each other type of thing, right? And so that's what
Right.
she focuses on as one example, right? So for my strategy in the coast of Maine, I grew up in the coast of Maine where 90% of the people that I grew up with they rely on tourism industry. They rely on the fishing industry. So I'll just use those two as an example. If if we are on the same page with the concept of what happens if the ocean waters keep warming faster and faster, well, there goes the lobster industry. What happened to the lobster industry in
Mhm.
Massachusetts? It moved north. It's no longer really there. It's not the powerhouse location it used to be, right? And it's just
Right.
going to continue to move north. So you're trying to relate what's at risk to the community members that and picking your battles in some way. Like that's an environment that I grew up with. I know that battle, so I can kind of talk about that battle in a way because that's where I was raised. We all can kind of have that type of an impact, and I think that's an important message we can kind of spread. Either way, it's not an easy topic, and I think the polarization and the political issues that we face in the U.S. do not help with what I'm suggesting here in this case. But I think other countries, they have these issues as well. But I think in general, they're able to see through that with the fact that they are making progress. They're making, much better progress than we are in a lot of the situations we're dealing with. So, I don't know if this really fully answers your question, but that's at
It was a
least my
long question. So, I
it,
mean, to
it
be
was,
fair,
but that's
I
that's
think,
that's my take. That's my take on it. That
yeah,
we have to
I
do.
think that's fair though. Like, I think that makes a ton of sense. It's what becomes difficult, I guess, is how do we start to depoliticize this
Mhm.
so that it can be viewed a little more openly? And that's one of the things that I really like. I love POW, and I'm a huge supporter of what they do. That's one of the things that I actually think that they could do a little better of a job at, is making people feel less like it's about their political party.
Yeah,
And I realize that we are coming off of a year where it was really important to make sure that the right, and again, like political biases aside, the right person, air quotes, got in there
yeah,
for the environment. It has nothing to
yeah.
do with your political beliefs, and we talked about this last year.
Mhm,
That part of it was what kind of became important. I
mhm.
just wish that there was a way to for them to kind of go out there and say, here's how we feel about this situation. We don't care where you come from. We don't care. And maybe they have put this out there and I just haven't seen it yet, but I feel like I'm in this industry enough and I'm like on all the content that gets out there enough that I should
Yeah,
know if it was out there.
yeah.
Uh,
The only thing that I think did a pretty, I mean, I completely understand what you're saying. I will say I think that Purple Rain that they came out with, the movie that kind of has
yes,
Jeremy skiing,
it was great.
boarding with other people, was phenomenal. I think it honed in on the concept of those personal connections and trying to build those personal relationships where you do have something in common despite all your backgrounds that you might, whether it's
Right.
political or religious or whatever, you still have common ground to stand on. I think that's an important message, at least if they can focus more on that, and if we as a community can focus more on that, you're not pushing people aside. There was a note that was interesting in Catherine's book that I noted, that she said, something along the lines of, there's 9 or 10% that you just aren't going to sway,
Yeah.
and you know you can generally pick those out, and so
Yeah.
you just gotta walk away from them. But we don't need 100%, right? We need less than 100% to be successful at what we're trying to do. So if you can generally pick out those people that you're not gonna be successful working with, and being able to communicate with, and you can work with those that are kind of more on the fence. That's our target, to try to sit down and try to brainstorm how we can kind of meet in the middle, and understand their perspective, understand our perspective, and try to help with the science details and the facts that are in reality, are 90% of the time, are probably going to be benefiting them as well. Um,
Yeah. No, and I don't want to make it sound like I'm like shitting on them in any way, because I think that they do an amazing job. It's just like the one area where I'm like, we kind of all need to be in the same know about this, right?
yep.
And the information needs to be easy to regurgitate, it needs to be easy to understand, and it needs to be completely like for everyone. And I
Yep.
think when I say that, I agree. Jeremy Jones's film was phenomenal. If you haven't seen it,
Mhm.
obviously go watch it, because I think it does a really good job of kind of highlighting that there is and it's important that we
Mhm.
kind of try to bridge that gap. One of the
Yep.
things that was tough for me was like, it very much highlighted that one party was not very interested in having the conversation,
Yeah.
and I think that that isolates the people that are part of that party and are like, oh, well, if that guy doesn't like him, maybe I don't like, and that's my
Yep.
only
Yep.
my only worry, I guess. And maybe I'm just making up a worry, but I think that it is potentially an area for improvement for an organization that does so much good.
Mhm.
And like, I don't know, I feel like I'm being nitpicky, like,
Yep.
because I like them so much, but I think that that's important for people,
I would
for this audience.
absolutely agree with you,
Okay.
and I can maybe close with this thought of, I agree with you. I grew up a conservative person, a very conservative. I grew up in a conservative household. I hunt, I fish. We ran a trap line, about as conservative as you generally get in a small, rural community. Um, I would classify in that community. I'm also a climate scientist, right?
Yeah. Right.
Um, so there's this dichotomy of what some people might be like. Well, how do you reconcile those? And I don't see it as reconciling. I see it as, I know I have a lot of conservative friends that are just as caring towards the environment as I am. Um,
Mm,
they're just more from a fiscally conservative perspective, so it's, I agree with you. We could absolutely do a better job at not pitting one against the other. And yeah, I think society in general pits one against the other. That's what's big for business.
right.
That's what's big in
For sure.
media, right?
Right.
That's what's pushed in media nowadays. It's not sexy if it's not pushed, if it's
And
not
I
two
say this
people
now, and
buying
I'm
it up.
sure I'm going to get a DM that's like, Adam, you're an idiot. Like you say this all the time, and you're like, don't vote for Trump, or like Trump's an idiot. Like I say these things now on this side of things, and I'm aware of like I'm just
Yep,
saying I want to be better at it because I really feel this way, right? Like
yep,
this is like
yep,
my actual thoughts on this. So
yep. No, I think it's fair. Yeah, and I think that's also like, the whole imperfect advocacy. We can all improve, and
right,
we can all
right,
do a better job at how we approach these situations. And if we all sit back and actually think, did I do a really good job at that? Probably not. I
yeah,
could probably improve what I did, how I phrased this the last
yeah,
conversation. I could probably not go off on that tangent that made the
for
person
sure.
upset, and kind of stick with the common ground kind of concept. So yeah,
Yeah,
but cool.
yeah, awesome. Seth, thank you for the time. This has been great. Where can people find you on the internet, Twitter,
Yep.
social, obviously your
Sure.
website?
Yeah, Twitter. If they want to see that link, it's Alpine Sciences. I'm on Twitter. Maybe I'll post something on Instagram. I post occasionally on Instagram, but not much. And then, of course, you can find me at. I also have a website, alpinesciences.net, that kind of shows a lot of kind of what I do from a science perspective. And then, of course, you can find me at the University of Maine in the School of Earth and Climate Sciences and Climate Change Institute. And then there's a lot of places to find me. I guess you can also find me in the Gene Weissfield Research Program. Like, what else? Yeah.
So
Um,
many things.
so I do some social media. I just don't pay attention to it that much. So.
Yeah, it's probably smart.